I was screaming into an intercom, fingers numb, throat raw, and a sound in my ears I'll never forget, sirens without urgency. Just the slow churn of emergency lights washing red over cold pavement. The paramedics were banging on the keypad like it was a stubborn vending machine, and 100 feet away my dad was dying. That gate wouldn't open, and on the other side of it stood the president of our HOA. Arms folded, back straight, watching. Her name was Karen. Yes, really? And she wore her smug like it was armor. When I begged her, through tears, through cracked voice and desperation, she said, and I quote, "Policy is policy." 3 days later, my father was dead. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad you're here. Every day, I share fascinating real-life stories with you. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you never miss the most meaningful moments. And today, I have another touching story to tell. Enjoy listening. I remember standing in the hospital hallway, the fluorescent lights flickering like they couldn't decide whether to work or not. I had just signed the papers to take him off life support. He never woke up. Massive stroke. By the time they got to him, because of that damn gate, he was beyond saving. Karen sent flowers. Except she didn't send them. She dumped them. A wreath on my porch. Inside, tucked between petals, a notice. Violation. Our front lawn grass, apparently, had exceeded the HOA height allowance by an inch. An inch. 2 days at the hospital and they fined me for grass. I stared at that piece of paper longer than I should have. I didn't cry, couldn't. Something else rose in me instead. A cold, methodical sort of fire. It wasn't just about grief anymore. It was purpose. Because if you think you know rage, try watching your father die behind a keypad while the person who could have opened the gate sips coffee on the other side. That day was Tuesday. I remember because I had already been on the phone with the DMV before the call came. Bad day made worse by a slurred voice. My dad, former Marine, proud, stubborn, thought painkillers were a government conspiracy. He sounded off. He told me he couldn't feel the right side of his body, that his vision was blurring. I didn't wait. I called 911. I peeled out of my office parking lot like the asphalt owed me time. The ambulance got there before me, but the gate stopped them. It was the kind that needed either a pre-approved code or manual override from a resident. I hit the intercom, praying for anyone. The camera blinked on. There she was, Karen, perfect blouse, helmet hair, clipboard, smiling like I just stepped out of line in her kindergarten class. "This vehicle," she said, looking directly at the ambulance, "is not registered." I told her, yelled at her, that my father was inside, having a stroke, that every second mattered. She consulted her clipboard like it was scripture. "Residents are responsible," she said, "for ensuring that their guests and services are pre-approved." Then she hung up. That gate didn't move. 13 minutes. That's how long it took before a different board member overrode the system. 13 minutes of me and 2 EMTs watching the seconds bleed out. When they got inside, he was on the floor, face slack, one arm limp, the other twitching just enough to make it worse. They worked fast. It wasn't fast enough. At the funeral, Karen didn't show, but she did leave a folded note on our front porch. Another citation. Apparently, our mailbox wasn't painted the approved community tone. It didn't match the beige palette. It was black, like the suit I wore to bury him. I wish I could say that's where it ended. That grief just faded. That time passed and we all learned to move on. But the thing is, there's a difference between moving on and letting go. And I wasn't letting go. Because here's what Karen didn't know. I'm not just any grieving son. I'm an estate planner with a minor in property law. And I had time. So I started digging. Not metaphorically. You ever hold a piece of paper so tight your fingers cramp? That was me, sitting in my dad's office, gripping a copy of the HOA bylaws like it owed me answers. The same HOA that watched my father die behind a locked gate was about to become my full-time project. Karen wanted policies. I was about to bury her in them. I started small paperwork, research, legal codes, the things they didn't expect anyone to actually read. Buried on page 43 of their charter was a clause about emergency access compliance. It referenced a local ordinance requiring all gated communities to provide immediate override access to emergency vehicles. Keyword, immediate. That gate, it had none. No override, no compliance, no grace, just metal and protocol, and because of that, my dad was dead. Technically, every minute that gate stayed locked during a medical emergency made them liable. But I couldn't scream that into a void. I needed proof, receipts. So I did what grief and a decade of estate law had taught me. I got methodical. I started walking my dad's dog around the neighborhood. Small talk, nothing heavy, just enough to get people talking. Did you hear about what happened? Yeah, terrible tragedy. You know, this isn't the first time. That sentence changed everything. One woman told me about her miscarriage. She was bleeding, panicked, couldn't get past the gate because her Uber wasn't registered. Another neighbor said their dog died in a house fire while firefighters waited at the keypad. A man down the street paid $100 every time his daughter parked facing the wrong way on the curb. Another was fined for drying laundry on the wrong day of the week. This wasn't community management. This was control dressed up as decorum. So I kept listening, compiling, building a case file with everything from cell phone footage to photos of citation letters. I didn't just want to take Karen down. I wanted to dismantle the system that gave her power in the first place. That's when the letter came. Certified mail, white envelope, HOA letterhead. Inside, a formal citation addressed to me personally. The violation, emotional disruption of community harmony. Apparently, yelling at paramedics while trying to save my father had caused distress to observing residents. I read it 3 times, not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could. It was classic Karen, weaponizing civility to punish desperation. And I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it confirmed everything. I now had a paper trail, an official acknowledgement that they knew, that they heard me, that they chose to cite me for breaking decorum rather than for delaying care. 2 days later, I filed my first complaint with the city. It wasn't a lawsuit, not yet, just a polite nudge. Request for review of gate installation permits. Spoiler, there were none. Next came the fire marshal's office. Then the local building authority. Then a quiet little complaint with the ADA about access limitations for elderly residents. Each move was deliberate, legal, documented. 1,000 paper cuts aimed at a fortress of red tape. But just when I thought I had momentum, I heard a knock at the door. Man in a cheap suit, slicked hair, indoor sunglasses. He smiled like someone who thought they'd already won and handed me a folder. "You've been served," he said, voice like a parking ticket. Karen was suing me. Harassment, defamation, disruption of neighborhood tranquility. And here's the kicker. She didn't file it under her own name. She filed it under the HOA. That meant the entire board was now legally entangled in her delusion. I stood on my porch, holding that lawsuit, feeling something I hadn't felt since the funeral. Clarity. Because here's the thing about people like Karen. They thrive when you fight angry, when you scream, when you act out. But I wasn't angry anymore. I was surgical. The manila folder sat on my kitchen table, untouched for 2 hours after I was served. I didn't need to open it yet. I already knew what it said. Karen was scared. Scared enough to throw every HOA buzzword into a blender and call it a lawsuit. Eventually, I poured myself a drink, sat down, and read it. Harassment, defamation, intentional disruption of neighborhood tranquility. That last one made me laugh out loud. Karen treated tranquility like a personal brand, one she trademarked, copyrighted, and posted in Comic Sans across the entire neighborhood. But here's what really stood out. Nowhere in those 30 pages of HOA legal fluff did she mention the gate, or the fact that it delayed life-saving medical care, or that my father died because of it. To her, the crime wasn't negligence, it was my attitude, that I dared to be loud, that I didn't quietly accept my loss, that I didn't fold into grief and disappear. So I made a call. Denise answered on the second ring. Estate lawyer by day, absolute shark by profession. Sharp suits, sharper mind. She read the complaint, took a slow sip of coffee, and said, "Oh, she's in for it." We filed a motion to dismiss the case, and then we went further. Denise drafted a counterclaim so sharp it practically bled through the paper. Wrongful death, gross negligence, obstruction, emotional distress, and the cherry on top, a public accountability suit. One that would bring Karen and her HOA empire into the spotlight they so desperately avoided. Then something I didn't expect happened. The story went viral. It started local. Some mid-tier news station picked up the lawsuit. HOA refuses emergency access. Resident dies behind locked gate. They used my dad's name on air. I wasn't ready for that. Hearing it in the anchor's voice knocked the wind out of me. But the response was immediate. Strangers reached out. Former HOA board members from other neighborhoods. Retired firefighters who'd seen it before. People from all over the country with their own stories. About gates that wouldn't open, citations for hosting birthday parties, fines for the direction a car was parked. Turns out everyone hates their HOA. I became something I never asked to be. A symbol. A reluctant hero in a very niche war. Suburban warfare, but with clipboards and bylaws instead of bullets. Karen, of course, panicked. Her response was a masterclass in passive aggression. She released a public statement that read like a high school valedictorian speech if the theme was gaslight the grieving. She said, "While our community mourns this unfortunate situation, we must also remember the importance of order, security, and respect for procedures designed to protect us all." She may as well have called my father's death an unfortunate scheduling conflict. Her smugness only fueled the fire. The comments section exploded. People weren't just angry, they were furious. Not just at her, but at the system. At the idea that a homeowners association could deny emergency services over a registration code. And the dominoes started falling. The city opened an investigation. The fire marshal conducted a surprise inspection of the gate system. Turns out the emergency override box Karen bragged about, completely non-functional, hadn't worked in over a year. Strike one. Then came the ADA compliance team. Turns out the neighborhood had several violations. Poor access for elderly residents, narrow walkways, improper signage. Everything that matters when time is measured in seconds. Strike two. But the real gut punch? The insurance audit. The HOA's liability insurance expired 6 months earlier. The renewal invoice? Unpaid. Karen had ignored it. Probably thought she was too important to read mail. Strike three. And just like that, the HOA wasn't just corrupt. It was exposed. Uninsured, non-compliant, and under formal investigation. But Karen? She still strutted through the neighborhood like nothing had changed. Still handing out citations. Still holding meetings under twinkle lights and folding chairs like she wasn't 3 feet from a legal cliff. At one board meeting, she even accused me of leading a coordinated smear campaign, as if I had nothing better to do than run a political coup against the queen of potted plants. I recorded everything, every word, every notice, every memo slipped under my door like it was laced with poison. I knew how this game worked now. In HOA world, documentation was ammunition. Meanwhile, Denise subpoenaed their financial records. When they stalled, we pushed harder. What we found made my stomach turn. Karen had been reimbursing herself thousands of dollars under vague labels like external representation and community morale boosts. Want to know what that meant? Spa visits, steak dinners, boutique hotel stays. She was using HOA funds, my father's dues, to treat herself like royalty. We handed the documents to the city attorney. They didn't even blink before opening a criminal investigation. But the moment I knew it was real, the moment that made it all feel worth it, I walked past Karen's house and saw a city inspector stapling a bright red violation notice to her door. I didn't say a word, didn't need to, because the woman who once fined me for letting my grass grow too long, she had just been cited for an unpermitted koi pond and misreported landscaping expenses. And that was poetic. The day Karen's deposition was scheduled, the air felt heavier. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was something else, like the silence before a storm, that eerie calm when even the birds seemed to hold their breath. She arrived late. No clipboard, no pearls, just a loose cardigan and a face that looked like it hadn't slept in weeks. Her hand trembled when she poured her water. Her voice, barely a whisper. She wasn't the villain at the end of the movie anymore. She was just a scared woman who finally realized the credits were rolling. Denise didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. She dismantled Karen's story question by question, email by email, memo by memo. Karen tried to deflect. I don't recall. That wasn't my decision. We were following procedure. But she couldn't outrun the evidence. Not when the flash drive showed everything. There was an entire thread, time-stamped, dated, and damning, where she discussed delaying emergency services to avoid precedent. Her words, not mine. If we allow one unregistered vehicle through, it opens the floodgates. The HOA can't afford that kind of liability. She said that. She wrote it. Imagine thinking letting someone die was a form of risk management. After the deposition, things moved fast. The city didn't wait for public opinion to settle. They revoked the HOA's operational license. Overnight, the organization dissolved. Its power? Gone. The bylaws? Null. The community was placed under temporary municipal management. An oversight committee formed. Emergency protocols were rewritten. And the gate, the very same gate that had once denied entry to paramedics, was physically removed. Dismantled bolt by bolt while residents watched from their porches like they were witnessing a long-awaited execution. Someone even brought cupcakes. Another rolled out lawn chairs like it was a tailgate party. A kid spray-painted "Access Denied" HOH on the old keypad before it was hauled away. It was catharsis in the shape of demolition. Karen didn't show her face during any of it. She'd moved out the week before, quietly, no ceremony, no farewell. Her house sold at a loss. Her bank accounts frozen. Her assets slowly drained by legal penalties and the mounting damages she now owed, not just to me, but to several families who had joined the class action lawsuit. Denise refused to settle quietly. We weren't going to let this end in a sealed agreement and a polite press release. People had suffered. Some were still suffering. Some would always carry the scars. Karen tried to hold on until the end. She organized one last press conference on the community lawn, dragged out a folding table, a portable speaker, and a banner that read, "Leadership Under Fire." No one clapped. Half the neighborhood laughed. The other half just walked away. But the part that hit me hardest? That didn't come from Karen. Came from Linda. She was a former board member, resigned a year earlier. Nervous voice, soft-spoken. She called me out of the blue, said she had something to show me. We met at a diner outside city limits. She slid a flash drive across the table, hands shaking. "There's more," she whispered. And there was. More emails, more evidence. Not just about our neighborhood, but others. HOA consulting records, side deals, emergency reroutes that resulted in delays. One entry that chilled me to the bone. Child fatality due to access failure. Karen had been doing this for years. Our community wasn't the first. It was just the one that finally pushed back. That flash drive, it turned grief into a mission. The lawsuit was done. The HOA was dead. But the rot was bigger than her. So I founded something new. The Emergency Access Initiative, a nonprofit dedicated to advocating for open gate legislation, standardized override systems, and the dismantling of unchecked HOA power. We pushed for a bill, one that would require every gated community in the state to provide emergency override access to paramedics, police, and fire services. Passed. Other states began drafting their own versions. We were just getting started. Back home, I stayed in my dad's house for a while. Not because I loved it, but because it was his. Every brick, every corner held some part of him. The stubborn Marine. The man who thought painkillers were a scam, but who built bookshelves for neighbors without asking for anything in return. The yard became a memorial garden. Simple. A bench. A plaque. His name. A space for silence. Someone left flowers there every week. I never found out who. Maybe someone he helped fix sprinklers for. Maybe someone who just remembered. Either way, it reminded me of something. People don't forget, especially when something shatters the illusion of safety. The gate was meant to keep danger out. Instead, it locked it in. But now, there was no gate, no clipboard, no HOA, just a neighborhood slowly learning how to be a community again. You'd think revenge would feel louder, more cinematic, like a slow clap echoing through a courtroom or fireworks over the ruins of a toppled regime. But when the judge signed the final order, when Karen's name was officially stripped from every title, account, and board, it wasn't triumph I felt. It was silence. Long, heavy. Still, that kind of silence that doesn't rush in with fanfare. It settles, like dust after a building's collapse. I sat there alone in my living room, the settlement papers still warm from the printer, and realized something I hadn't allowed myself to think about in months. I missed my dad. Not just his voice or his sarcasm or the way he insisted on grilling even in the rain, but his steadiness. His unflinching way of standing firm, like oak roots in a storm. He would have hated all of this. The lawsuits, the noise, the spotlight, but he also would have been proud. The HOA? Dissolved. The board? Disbanded. Its assets seized. Its files turned over to city management. The community? Now under oversight from an elected municipal team, one that rotated members every 6 months. No more lifetime reigns. No more clipboard tyrants. And the gate? Gone. Physically ripped out. Posts unbolted. Keypad shattered and hauled away in the back of a city truck. Someone planted bright orange marigolds where the intercom box used to be. A quiet act of rebellion wrapped in color. Dad hated flowers. Said they were just fancy weeds with better PR. But I think he would have liked these. Not because of how they looked, but what they meant. That something once cold and cruel had been replaced by something alive. The house stayed quiet after that. Not just because Karen was gone, but because the neighborhood had changed. People smiled more, lingered longer on their porches. Dogs barked without fear of noise citations. Kids rode bikes down sidewalks without adult supervision being logged in some HOA spreadsheet. And I kept busy, because grief like mine, it doesn't vanish. It just changes shape. It settles in your chest like a stone you learn to carry. But it gets lighter when you know it wasn't for nothing. We expanded the Emergency Access Initiative. Started small, local interviews, educational videos, community toolkits. Then statewide training programs for emergency responders dealing with locked communities. Then legislative pushes. Our bill passed in 2 states. Then a third. Then I got the second flash drive. Linda again. This time she didn't meet me in person. Just a package, no return address, left on my doorstep with a note. She built more than we knew. I plugged it in with shaking hands. Inside, records from 4 other communities. Deals. Secret HOA consulting contracts. Emergency access reroutes. One entry logged a delay that ended in the death of a child. Karen hadn't just ruled our neighborhood. She'd replicated it, scaled it, a quiet little empire of protocol and paranoia. And I knew then this wasn't over. So I didn't stop. I started a podcast, Behind the Gate, interviewed residents, first responders, lawyers, people who lost parents, pets, pregnancies, all because someone with a clipboard decided a rule mattered more than a life. The response was overwhelming. People didn't just listen. They poured out their stories. Emails, calls, anonymous tips, different names, same patterns. And slowly, like light through a cracked window, the illusion began to break. I still think about that day at the gate. Still hear the beeping keypad in my sleep. See Karen's face in that little camera screen. Hear my own voice cracking. My father's voice slurred and confused on the phone. I can't change what happened, but I can make sure it doesn't happen again. The last time I visited the old gate site, the marigolds were blooming. The breeze was soft. A kid pedaled past me on a scooter. No gate to stop him. No clipboard to track him. Just freedom. I stood there a while, hands in my pockets, and whispered something under my breath. Just for me. Just for him. Too late for flowers. But at least no one has to die to get in anymore. Then I turned around, climbed into my car, and drove toward whatever came next. Because I wasn't just here to burn one gate down. I was here to tear down the whole damn system. And that brings us to the end of this story. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very last moment. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. I've also picked 2 more videos you might enjoy, so don't forget to check them out. See you again soon with a brand new story. Until next time.